The subject of this presentation is how to come up with the actual training plan. Now, you've been armed with a lot of different tools for training. You've got different teaching methods, ways of analyzing objectives, you've thought about needs and figured out what they actually need to know in order to meet those needs. And so you've got a lot of tools at your disposal, and your book provides great information on specifics on how to create the actual training plan. Ultimately, what you're doing is you're creating an outline. You've got objectives, and you've got the different activities, lectures, discussions, all the tools that you're going to use to achieve those that overall training goal. So I'm not going to talk a lot about those specific things. Instead, I want to just cover a couple of tips that might be counterintuitive when planning a good lecture. So the first is that when you're creating a training, is that I often work backwards. A lot of times when we outline things, we think, okay, first I'm going to say this, next I'm going to say this, and then finally I'm going to say this. But oftentimes when you're training, it's good to put the important stuff in first and then kind of fill in around. You've heard the analogy that if you've got rocks, pebbles, sand, and water, if you put the water in, you throw the sand in, that'd probably be okay, but by the time you put the little rocks and then the big rocks in, the big rocks won't fit. So start by putting the big rocks in the bucket, and then pour the pebbles in, then pour the sand in, then pour the water in, and it'll all fit. Thinking about training in this way, what are the big rocks, right? What are the important things that have to get done, okay? And then what are the objectives and tools that I can use, and those are in ways pebbles, that I can go in to reinforce it. And then what are the ways that we're going to do that, and that's kind of the sand. And then what are the incidental things like the games or the introductions or whatnot. How does that need to kind of fill in the cracks and finish all of that, fill in all of that space? So work backwards. Think, okay, I want to talk about conflict in the workplace, but what do I need to accomplish before I actually have that conversation? Well, I would need people who trusted me and thought that I was a competent communicator. I would need people who trusted each other and were willing to open up to each other. And I would need them to have certain mastery of this, and this concept. Okay, so if this is the real discussion that you want to have, workplace conflict, what then do I have to do in order to get them to that place where a real conversation can take place? I mean, think about this. We know this in our relationships very well. There's a difficult subject. You know you've got to talk about it with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, but you know you can't talk about it if they're in a bad mood. And you don't want to talk about it until you get your paycheck and you stop, you can pay this so you can stop worrying about this money. We know that in order to accomplish certain interpersonal objectives, certain things have to be in place, right? Before you ask the girl to marry you, well, you've got to date her for a while, you've got to find a ring, maybe you ask her parents, and you're pretty sure that she's going to say yes, is going to say yes, so you got to, feel it out or have the marriage conversation, right? And we know those things. There is a step-by-step process, and in order to have that go well, that she say yes when I ask her to marry me, I've got to get this, and this right, okay? So work backwards. Work backwards from the thing that you want to train and say, what else needs to go into my training before we get to that final thing? So that's the first. Think backwards. What do I want to accomplish, and then what do I have to do in order to get to that final goal? That'll help you outline. In essence, your training, you start, say, 2/3 of the way into your outline, and then you build up, and then once you see that, then you can pack an introduction and a conclusion onto the beginning and end. So first, think backwards. The second thing is pay attention to pacing. Okay, so once you've got like the big idea down, and once you've got some idea of the methods that you're going to use to get there, then start thinking about pacing. Some activities are high-powered, energetic, fast. Other activities are slower, more introspective, reflective. Some activities are alone, solitary. Other activities are together. And there's a certain pacing. Your book will tell you, and this is generally true, that people can really only keep their focus on something for about 20 minutes at a time. That's not a bad rule, that every 20 minutes to kind of change up the method of instruction or participation in some kind of way. So, if you're talking for 20 minutes, then having a breakout discussion that lasts 10 or 15 is a way that you can kind of punctuate the talking. So you talk, they discuss, you talk, they discuss. That's a very rudimentary model, but it's a way of making things seem, make things have flow. So pay attention to pacing. If it's real early in the morning, then you're going to need to have something in the beginning to kind of get people energetic. Whereas if it's later in the afternoon, you might want to put the energetic activities later, knowing that they're going to come in fairly energized from the activities of the day, but they're going to hit like a lower energy thing later in the afternoon. So just pay attention to pacing. It's a little, it's a little like an orchestra, and some of it can be done on the fly, although in your plan, you're expected to lay out what you expect. But if you notice that this group over here is starting to, get disinterested, or on this particular subject, they're disengaged, find a way, to bring them in. So be strategic about the energy levels of your audience, and also not only the energy levels, but the different kinds of mental requisites. So to listen requires a certain kind of thinking, but then to generate a list requires a different kind of thinking. And so you can change up not only the energy level, but in a way the modes of thinking by having a pacing or flow to your overall training. So when you're creating your training plan, pay attention to that. Work backwards and then pay attention to flow. Finally is mood. And this is a hard thing to teach, it's a hard thing to explain, and it's definitely a hard thing to plan for. But if you can do it, it's so worth it. We are motivated by our moods, and how we feel. The mood that we're in has a strong determination on how we participate in activities, how we take up knowledge, and how we act on it and feel about a particular subset of knowledge. Now, when I say mood, a lot of people say, oh, well, I've got to have excited people. I've got to raise their energy levels. That's kind of true. A lot of students come into the class at low energy, so assuming that you've got people who are disinterested is probably not a bad place to start. But not all subjects are best understood in like hyper alertness. There are some things that are way better discussed if the energy is lower. So if you're going to talk about a really, really difficult situation, say, sexual abuse or something like this is maybe not a high energy subject. Self-defense, that's a high energy subject. But how to counsel somebody after they've been abused sexually, that's probably not a great high energy subject. So you're going to want to pay attention to where you want them to be. Now, if you think of energy, moods from kind of a high-low energy perspective, obviously high energy, happy moods are really great for getting people to enjoy themselves, having a lot of ideas to move around quickly, and generally it makes things more memorable. But there are what I would describe softer or more sensitive, delicate, or in a way more beautiful or wonderful things. They need to be dealt with other moods. So while you're planning your training, you can kind of combine all three of these together: an attention to mood, an attention to pacing, and working backwards. So if you know that you want to talk about a particular subject, then you can accomplish the things that you need to, and you can order them in a way so that you're changing up them using kind of different modes of being as you're getting to that final step. And as you're going there, you're hitting the right mood at every step of the way. So if you're gonna go into a more somber, solemn, or meditative conversation, try to get some kind of activity that as you're transitioning out of, it puts them in a reflective kind of mood. They're thoughtful, they're engaged, but kind of in a calm way. Writing calms people. Talking about sensitive subjects calms people, but there are activities that you can do which are like slower or more reflective. Asking people to journal and read is generally a low energy type activity, whereas other things, you're going to want people to be excited, into it, things happening real quick. And so think about ways that you can kind of ratchet up the energy. Activities that involve throwing or moving, standing or speaking, some drawing and explaining drawings and putting stuff up on boards. Collaborative work tends to raise the energy in a room. Anyway, so those are my 3 suggestions. Work backwards, pay attention to the pacing or the flow, and finally be attentive to mood. And if you do all 3 of those things mixed with all the rest of the stuff that you've learned in the class, you should be able to make a pretty cool training.